I'm very excited, sorry. So my first question would be, your biographies read like compelling narratives. And how do you balance storytelling with very accurate historical facts? This is quite a balance.
It is.
In a narrative.
And it's complicated even more when one is writing the life story of people who are under-documented or about which we can know very little, because you not only have to find the story, but recognize that there are silences in the story, and how do you make silence interesting? So I think and that's particularly true for women or other groups who are traditionally under-documented. But back to the actual question you asked, which is, I think the best piece of advice I got when I moved from writing academic work, where basically you are showcasing everything I have found about X and proving a point, and that's your thesis, to writing trade biography, where it's got to be about, it's not just about proving your thesis. An editor said to me, my first really wonderful editor, she said, and I was tying myself up in knots, and I was saying, should I have footnotes? Should I be saying this? Should I be saying that? Do they need to know the history of this town that I'm describing? And she said, just tell the story. And I thought, that sounds very simple. But what she really meant was, find your story. And that is the task, because you have all this information and you cannot tell all the stories. You cannot tell everything about this person, because that's not a book. That's not a narrative. You have to, and it's that choice, which is the most important story to tell. And then what happens is all the other stories, they're hooked onto it. They're accessorizing your central story.
So it's like using the facts and then stringing them in a way to tell the story.
Yeah, or looking at the facts, looking at the data, and I always start with a skeleton or a timeline, and then thinking, what really is the red thread? What is the most important story here? And often, when you're doing biography, those stories have been told. I mean, I've written a biography of William Shakespeare. We think we know the life of William Shakespeare. I've written the biography of, Clara Schumann, to give a musician, composer. And we think we know that story because she appears. But in the case of Clara Schumann, she appears as the love interest for Johannes Brahms. That's most people's stories. Or, the tragic wife and widow of Robert Schumann. What if we put her story centrally? What if I put her as a mother of 8 children?
She's always
centrally?
a subject usually, but now you're... Okay.
But it's putting somebody else, her story central, perhaps her experience of motherhood. That's my story. So it's deciding in all the data that you have what you're going to shine your light on. And the image I sometimes use is, in my own mind, is that wide shot at the beginning of a film of a huge landscape. And my job as a writer is to bring the reader to the one important building or mountain or whatever in that landscape, and show it all its detail, but also for us to understand that particular story's place in a bigger story. So that
amazing. No, it's very clear.
But that choice is very tough. Because we want to tell everything.
This is the main thing almost. And the factual bits are supporting that or feeding into that kind of.
Well, for me, they have to, because I do have a kind of commitment to telling untold stories.
Which is leading
the
other question of mine, actually. In Sounds and Sweet Airs, which is a fantastic book, you highlight overlooked female composers. So what challenges do you face when writing about women whose histories have been silenced and fragmented? And we see them in every area. It's not like, in poor areas or in this part of the world. No, it's everywhere.
I think there are 2 answers which may sound contradictory, but they're not. Answer 1 is that when you start looking, there are riches there. I have found that with every female creative person or every female figure from the past, there's actually so much more than we think. People have just been looking in the wrong place, or asking the wrong questions, or overlooking huge parts of a woman's life because it doesn't fit with what we think of as history, because they didn't sit in Parliament, because they weren't, they didn't have public power. We think there's nothing in the cupboard, and you go to the cupboard and actually you start looking in the corners, you start searching through, and I found riches. So, but the second answer is that I found, and this comes back to the first question you asked, that certain kinds of stories dominated. And that's what I keep coming back to. These women are not under... There is material to find out about them if we
look from another
perspective and don't just see a woman in terms of either her sex life or what she's not done. Yeah. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's actually more encouraging than you'd think.
It is. Well, I already know the answer now, because we've just come out of amazing Table 52's talk, but I want to ask again for the Tales and Tunes audience. So after years of writing acclaimed nonfiction, what inspired you to write your first novel in fiction, and how did that shift feel creatively?
Well, what I didn't say earlier, but is relevant particularly to this conversation, is that Sounds of Sweet Airs, the book about female composers, came out of a similar moment when I was looking back at paths that I hadn't taken in my life. And I trained quite seriously with music as a teenager before I realised, not in a bad way, but just realised in a healthy way, that I wasn't good enough to pursue it as a career. Okay. Absolutely not. And I didn't want to either. I wanted to keep it as a pleasurable, hobby, and that's absolutely fine. So it wasn't like a great regret about a life unlived, but I did compose, and then I learnt how to compose, and I stopped composing. And that doesn't sound as crazy as it is. In music education at A level, you learn how to do a Bach chorale, you learn how to write a Schubert song accompaniment, you learn it formally, and that stopped me actually doing my own creative writing. So and one of the things I was interested in Sounds of Sweet Airs was what stopped women, particularly women,
not
from pursuing, whether they were 14 or 17 or 30 or what have you. So that was an itch that I needed to scratch for very personal reasons. When it came to writing fiction, I also was going back to my teenage self, and I happened to be going through lots of diaries and things, and
everything
realised, it is
there,
it is it's like this sort of volcano waiting. And I just felt I had gone as far as I wanted or could down the non-fiction path. I'd written some big books, some weighty books, some capstone works. I'd ticked all the boxes, and there was something in me that was tired, that was just, I wanted to have fun again. I wanted to have fun.
Unfulfilled maybe.
And I wanted to write just for the hell of it again, and not to a contract, and not because it was my job, and my children are grown up. I have financial security, have the time and the money and the freedom in myself to do something just for the hell of it. And so I returned to it.
So this was I want to ask you about the challenge of it as well, because now it's like you moved out of your comfort zone in a way. So there should be some challenges coming along the way, and also creative expression.
I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
It's like being naked.
I was very inspired by teaching and working on the master's programme at Oxford, where students would come, hugely competitive entry, they'd be pretty good writers when they arrived.
I can imagine.
And in their first year, they were forced out of their comfort zone. So they would arrive saying, I'm a poet, and by the end of the year they'd have written a screenplay. They'd arrive saying, I'm a novelist, and they'd be writing memoir by they would take so many and be forced into taking risks. And they did. I did it with good grace, and I thought, if they can do it, I will do it myself. But I had no idea whether I could. And I think and this sounds a bit pompous, but I gave myself permission to fail. And I gave myself permission to stop. And normally I don't. I'm very driven. I'm very results driven. I'm very, what's the word? I'm like alpha.
Okay, yeah.
And always have been. You know, I deliver manuscripts on time. I'm quite a hard taskmaster of people around me and myself. And with this book, I just thought, if it's not fun, I can walk away. And that was bliss.
Okay, so that gave you the freedom.
Yeah.
For creating great texts.
And I think that may be one of the reasons people are saying the book's quite funny.
Yeah.
Is that my humour is, I allowed it.
You are, I like your sense of humour as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. And before, I mean, it's not in the list, but before carrying on to the last one, I really would like to ask you about your book, Death of an Englishman, an Oxford mystery. Why did you write this book?
As we've been talking, in a sense, it was an exercise, a way to try to have fun again. And when I began, I didn't. I suppose, of course, somewhere I thought, oh well, I'll finish it and it'll come out into the world. But really, it was about the process. And what I actually, and maybe I shouldn't get this out into the world because it's slightly on the edge of what's the word? Gossip or somebody might sue me, but I realised it was also from a position of anger at the book industry features in here, and I was quite disillusioned with the book industry. Our culture wars is in the book, and I felt very upset by a lot of things that we're arguing about now or fighting about. So it is no coincidence that the person who ends up dead, and this is no spoilers involved, is a biographer. So you could get very Freudian about this, actually. But he's, yes. And so in some sense, I was just having fun with my own career. And
interesting.
But I do love genre fiction.
I just got this now, but I'm really intrigued to read it now. Okay.
Yes. So it's a biographer who can't finish his biography, who ends up dead. So there's something I'm playing with what it is to be a writer, and a lot of the characters are engaged with the same kind of struggle, as it were. So the book is fun, it honestly is fun, but it's also romance. And I think, as I've said elsewhere, I think crime fiction, genre fiction, can take us to the dark places, to death and sadness and despair and fear, but offer the fairy tale ending, the solution, the consolation, that it all comes right in the end.
Offers a solace as well at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. And it's fiction with a capital F. There's no pretense that this is realistic. It's a fantasy. Yeah. And I think we need that so badly. You know,
especially
I need
in these
it.
Circumstances of the world,
absolutely, yeah. It's why I read crime fiction, for the consolation, which, you know, and yeah.
Oh, amazing. And last question is, what advice would you give to non-fiction writers considering a leap into fiction? Or academic writers? Because you belong to both of the worlds.
Yeah, I belong to both of the worlds, and I can give an intellectual answer, which is, it is all narrative. You asked me about finding the story. That's what it's about. Whether you're writing non-fiction, there's no distinction. You're telling a story. There is no distinction at all. We're all just putting words on paper or on the computer or in our voices, and we're all telling stories. And if you go back to the earliest epic, to Homer, or the earliest powerful stories of ourselves, they're handed down generationally, and they're histories. They're non-fiction, if we want to call it, but they're also fiction. And so we've always, as humans, needed to tell our stories. And there's a kind of truth to all narratives, an authenticity. And so letting go of that sense, this is one thing, this is another thing. Equally with this book, it is genre fiction, it's cosy crime. I hate the term phrase cosy crime, but that is what it is. It's gentle. But it's a novel. I remember my agent saying, I'm sending out your novel. And I said, I haven't written a novel. And she said, yes, you have. I said, no, it's crime fiction. She said, no, you've written a novel. It was the first time I'd actually thought, oh, I've written a novel, which sounds crazy. So my touchy-feely answer is, what would I say to anybody embarking on anything? Have the courage just to do it, just to turn up, do it, and then let it go. Let it go out into the world. Yeah.
Shamelessly, yeah.
tell the inner editor to shut up and all of the reasons to not do it, because we can always find. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
My
Anna-Maria.
pleasure.
I mean, it was such an enjoyable talk, and I can't wait to read this wonderful book.
I will give you one postscript, since that we're talking about music and we both love music.
Yeah.
I tried to make my detective different from myself in some ways. There are many ways in which she is very similar to myself. And people are saying, oh, she's you. She doesn't like music. And I tried to make that the kind of the big thing. And I found it really hard to imagine somebody
Not
who didn't
liking
need music. She couldn't see the point. She's taken to a concert and she's just thinking, goodness, when is this going to end? And she doesn't need music on when she's working.
It's like dystopia.
Yeah, yes. But I had to have her different in some way.
Thank you again for
Okay.
the lovely talk.